Welcome to Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere with your host, Chris Parker.
And welcome back to Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere. This is Chris Parker, and I am having a conversation with Remco Janssen, who is a founder and publisher of Silicon Canals, which is really, I think, the go-to place for information about startups and startup investments in the Netherlands and certainly around Amsterdam. So Remco, thank you for joining. And I'm almost hesitant to ask you a question because you, as a journalist and a very curious person, have said you've got questions for me. So I'm wondering if maybe I should just talk for 30 minutes instead of open myself up. So before we get there, Remco, can you please share with everyone, what is it that you do and why are you doing what you do?
Yeah, thank you, Chris, for having me. And I will certainly flip the switch. So as you said, Remco Janssen, you pronounced it correctly. Most Americans do screw that one up. And also you pronounce Silicon Canals correctly, which is usually screwed up by Dutch people. As a form of a brief introduction, in 2014, around this time of year, so now 7 years ago, I was riding my bike on the canals in Amsterdam. And I was just sort of wondering why there were so many startups in Amsterdam and why they were all popping up on the canals. And I was just like immediately, Silicon Canals. Yeah, these should be called the Silicon Canals. Of course, Silicon Valley comes to mind immediately. And it turns out that people were actually already sort of informally using that phrase, but nobody really did anything with it. So I registered the domain. I registered the Twitter account, the Facebook page. And somewhere around August 2014, we launched Silicon Canals. It was just a very hideous WordPress theme. We started blogging in Dutch about the Amsterdam startup ecosystem. And it sort of gradually grew from there, which now, years later, we're publishing in English. We're actually covering Europe, but still with a close focus on Amsterdam because of our partnership with the city of Amsterdam. And of course, Benelux is one of our focus region, but you can easily say that our main focuses are the Benelux, Germany, France, the UK, the Nordics, let's say the main startup regions in Europe. And of course, every region needs good startup media because that's where, everything comes from. If there's nobody watching and covering this industry, the industry can't grow. And that's what we're all about.
And why is that all you're about? Meaning, as you were, bicycling down the canals, there was something within you that was open to this or needed this. So I'm curious, what is the why behind the why there?
Yeah, what's the why behind the why? Wow, that's a good question. And I love it that you actually pulled out this Simon Sinek out of your big magician head early on. So it's because what we've realized back when I was cycling on the canals, I actually was running a PR agency called Proudly Represents for Startups in sort of a way as I still do, although my main focus is Silicon Canals. And what we've noticed is that a lot of the media, especially the larger media, and the national media, as we call it here, do not really understand startup and startup culture, at least not back then. Now we do more, about how investment works and exits and IPOs. Back then, if somebody got, a 500,000 euro investment, people would ask, "Oh, you're almost a millionaire now, right?" They wouldn't understand that that's actually investment into a company. And we were all about educating, the media for starters, but also, the entire ecosystem, also ecosystem builders, but also people, from the general audience about how startup works and also showcasing that this is an industry to watch. And in the same week that we launched, the Netherlands actually came with Startup Delta, which is now called Tech Leap, an initiative to promote startup entrepreneurship from the Startup Delta. Really weird phrase to call the Netherlands a delta. We hardly ever do that. So, and the weird thing was that, in a way, the European ecosystem is still not as mature as, of course, the American one, but in the years, obviously the ecosystem grew, but other ecosystems grew faster. So let's say, Korea or Southeast Asia, China, and still, the United States, the startup ecosystem is still booming for a large part. And even though Europe is growing, we're still lagging behind. So I would say that even now more than when we started, the European ecosystem needs like professional media parties that are following the industry as if they were trade media, because trade media makes stuff happen for you. And yeah, I mean, that's probably the why behind the why, I would say.
And as you've clearly been sort of comparing and contrasting against other geographies and their startup cultures, a belief I have, ungrounded, is one of the reasons why maybe Silicon Valley is more prolific is really has to do with risk appetite, and maybe the culture around the American dream, that people are willing to sacrifice and suffer for very, an illusion of potential grandeur.
Yeah.
While at least my experience in the Netherlands, people are much more prudent, and
Yes.
and maybe investment proposals are even more business case driven. So they're actually asking for ROI. It's a different approach to risk, is my feeling. What is your observation around that, and have you seen those dynamics?
I mean, that's spot on what you're saying right now. So I was talking to a large American corporation this week about a potential partnership, and they were actually, switching their own business model towards them a little bit, because they noticed that there was an overrepresentation of bootstrap startups, and that was a very good analysis. What you see a lot, or it's not per se bootstrap startups, but Dutch startups don't need a lot of money in the beginning. They started bootstrapping either, or they will have a friends, family, and fools round. It's very hard to raise an angel round with just an idea or just a very basic business plan. So what people do here, I call them the typical preppy startup founders. They can also be female, but of course there's a huge overrepresentation of men. The preppy Dutch business founder basically looks like me. It's a white male, wearing a shirt and a sweater and a little jacket, usually jeans, and then either sneakers or, if they're a little bit more on the preppy side, they have suede shoes, or brown shoes, leather shoes. And, they're really business guys and girls, and they know how to make money. And I always say we have the VOC mentality. So from the East Indian Company, from the 17th century onwards, the Netherlands has always been, an international country, and doing international trade. We're not going into difficult topics as, slave trade and colonialism, but this is the origin of the stock exchange and the origin of business as we know it right now. That comes from the Netherlands. And we're still doing that in the same way in the tech industry, making money. And that's what a startup founder in the Netherlands will do first and foremost, looking ways to, make money and grow in their own capacity. And that they will raise funding, sure, that happens a lot. But you see many, many very interesting scale-ups, and some even going IPO. Takeaway.com was, almost entirely self-funded. They didn't raise a large round until 2014, and they were incepted in, I think, 1999 or something. And even the round that they raised in later on, Takeaway.com, was, this is from my mind, and I'm very bad with numbers, I think it was around 80 million. And you should understand that the market cap of Takeaway.com right now is in the billions. So this is what happens with a typical Dutch startup, Not too much cash goes in, smaller investment rounds. We're able to really bootstrap for a long period. And even then, they're very prudent with their money, as you said. So I would almost use the word scruffy. And And that's, I think, for one part, that's a good thing. But there's also a downside, if you're competing on an international scale. You see often when there's Dutch startups competing with large players in larger markets, or let's say in the European market, it can happen that, let's say, a Spanish startup or a German startup can have, let's say, a 50 million round, while a Dutch startup is still doing the same thing, going after the same market with only 5 million in their pocket. And it's also because, especially in the beginning, it's hard to raise capital, and capital against good terms. So that means that, the founder has to give up, or the founders have to give up a lot of equity in the beginning, or they have very peculiar arrangements with, convertible notes stacked up on each other, and then there's a very crowded cap table. And when institutional VCs come in, they first have to clean ship, and that can be a really messy ordeal often. And I've seen it happen more than once, that if a company doesn't really grow, then you sort of hit like a glass ceiling where they can't really raise money anymore because the cap table is just a big mess. And then the only thing that they're able to do is to go bankrupt. And that's a shame, because that's not really necessary. And also, I would say that bankruptcy or insolvency is a bit more shameful than in American culture. So I think these are the main hurdles for let's say, the Dutch startup ecosystem.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the bankruptcy, because I think in the States, Chapter 11 is worn like a badge of honor. People collect them, and then there's because if you haven't failed twice, you haven't lived, and the whole, go big or go home, sentiment, which is not really here like that, but in maybe it's also the market size, perhaps, meaning the consumer market size to start with. I don't know, but it's a fascinating dilemma or dynamic to watch the two sides of it. So, yeah. Looping back to Silicon Canals, obviously you have some really interesting insights into some of these journeys, because not only is customer acquisition and getting that initial traction and getting the value propositions nailed. And you've done some PR work for me in the past when we didn't have any of those things. Yeah. So the as well as the capital raising, and then the scaling from there, these are just fascinating journeys. And what I like about some of the stuff that I see on Silicon Canals is it also has a bit of a human dimension to it. Meaning there's people behind these stories, and that's sort of the balance that I see. Maybe, and I'm curious if that's intentional, to be not only sort of intellectual fact based, but also a bit of a, I don't know, community, human sentiment. I don't know. Is it a community? I don't know. What's your vision for it? Yeah. Yeah,
no, that's very nice that you bring that up, because that's what we're trying to do. And I feel actually that we don't do that enough, put the face forward. But our number one rule is, and that's probably why you feel like that, is that if we have images on our website about a company, it needs to have faces, and preferably multiple. This is just our number one thing. We want to see the faces behind it. And, if somebody sends me, no, but we have a very nice visual, a graphic visual that represents our merger or investment, I'm just like, I don't care. It looks awful. We want to see the people behind it, and I don't care if you're, male, female, white, brown, black, Asian, I don't know. If you're a unicorn with 3 legs, I don't care. We just want to see the people behind the company. And even better if it's a team photo, that's even nicer, as long as it's not the founders jumping on a rooftop with the hoodie. That shit's done. But no, to us, that's the most important thing. And this is probably where I want to ask you some questions about podcasting. I think we should also, I'm hoping to launch a podcast series this year where we can actually interview the people behind it. So the way you formatted it, I'm not going to say I'm going to exactly copy you, but I'm definitely up for learning. You did 100. And I know for a fact that there's a lot of people that want to work with us. So they say, hey, we have a podcast, or we have, we're doing startup stories, interviews, or, we have this series of talks that we do with people. Can we collaborate? And I'm like, sure, go ahead. But one thing, if you're going to do it, you have to do it for at least a year. You need to have like a proper cadence. Is it a proper word in English? I don't know.
Cadence.
So
Yeah,
cadence. A proper rhythm where you publish something at least, let's say, weekly or bi-weekly, and you have to go for it. And I need at least, like a couple of dozen, but at least a couple of hundred episodes. Otherwise, I'm not going to pursue it. And that's the same thing for me. I know that if I'm going to launch like a podcast series, it doesn't need to become like a stepchild or anything. It needs to be something for the long run. So, yeah.
Why would you launch a podcast? So this is one of the questions that I ask because as the longer I've been doing it, more people are asking me about podcasting, and I'm not an expert. But what is the purpose behind this?
I can better ask you, but the purpose is, from my knowledge and expertise, is that people want to hear other people's story and they get inspired by others. And I'm two things. I'm a journalist, right? So I have a bachelor in journalism, and my specialty is newspaper. So I'm originally a newspaper publisher turned blogger turned online journalist. But my subspecialty should have been radio, and I was always a radio freelancer. So I actually come from the radio world, and I know how to tell stories and interview people on the radio. And why not use this, let's say, talent or gift or whatever, to find those inspiring stories and do it? Because interviewing somebody in writing takes up a shitload of time. And doing it in a podcast, you can actually do two things. You can air it as a podcast, but you can also transcribe them or have them transcribed and then do a write-up, do it like a proper written interview out of it. So you can have best of both worlds. And for me as a publisher, I'm always, my main focus is always getting as much page views as possible. But this is more of like the slow burner. Right. So you get a lot of page views, but you also get these heaps of interesting stories and people, and you actually connect with your community. You can actually partner with people. And right now, everything is over email, and we write stories, and it feels like we're somewhere hidden in the basement, and we're not really, we get all this information, but I want to feel like the real connection with these founders, and get grab them out of their sort of bubble, their startup bubble, and get the real information, and ask them, how are you actually doing? How are you doing psychologically? Are you really fine? Because I know that a lot of founders struggle with mental issues, for instance, and everybody always gives you this, just this almost like an opera or a saga or a myth, of startups being, hockey stick growth and, unlimited funding to be picked up everywhere. It's simply not true, and the only way you can find that out is by actually, sitting down with somebody and asking questions. And that's what I'm.
Well, a couple of reactions. There's one, there's a why does it work? And then there's also a question, which is still unanswered, which is a why for you. And so I think one of the reasons why it works, and I think this is like Eric Sue, who's like a growth marketer expert, and they've got an excellent podcast on marketing school, I think is what it's called. So I'm going to attribute to him if this is right, but it's the fact that it's so intimate, because people are typically listening to podcasts in their ears. So literally you're having this conversation in them, and that is not really, there's not really another media that is so intimate like that. And I think that is one of the reasons why it works. And in this case, we're having a conversation. So we're actually having a conversation in their head with them. And they are, of course, imagining. Because I do this with Christian Kuniga, my filmmaking friend, that's the only reason we do video also, because this is where we started. But actually it complicates things, because editing audio is a thousand times easier than editing and color correcting and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And there's, I think Audible is the audio podcast sort of sound designer that just it automatically corrects a lot of the volumes and things. So it's very, very easy.
Yeah.
So why it works, I think, is because it's such an intimate, immersive connection way in their heads. And then why it could be meaningful for you. And I love the fact that you already picked up on the transcribe it and then, you know, have sort of an evergreen type of approach to that. But if your primary measure of success is page views, then what I would be recommending is how could you connect the podcast to drive page views? And this would be, you know, whatever the call to action is, or for more information, or it should be in service to something. Because if you're just doing a podcast for fun, then that's why you don't have the longevity, you don't have the cadence. So it's
exactly.
So one of the things that you know, so it, you know, because you have your newsletter, and I would suggest people go to siliconcanals.com, sign up for the newsletter, so you'll get this. And then if you also had a podcast channel that people are subscribing to, and in that you could even say, hey, we're talking to so-and-so from so-and-so. And by the way, here's 3 articles on Silicon Canals now, which can then drive people to get more rich and different experience. I think you could find a really nice, I don't want to call it a funnel, but sort of a connection between these different channels. And I think definitely having, well, you as a journalist and sort of, you know, knowing what to ask, I think you'd probably be marvelous at it as well, because it's just your own curiosity.
Yeah, one thing I would do if I would be launching a podcast, it would be, I would always be finding for these little scraps of news. I had an interview today with a founder, and, you know, so halfway through the conversation, he said, well, for us, this deal is a shortcut to unicorn status. And, you know, immediately for me, that's a headline. Right. And this is the way we think as publishers. You know, I'm thinking of news headlines, because news headlines drive, you know, fast traffic. And that's what's driving the page views. But to get back to you, you know, subscribers is something different than page views. Is a different metric for me, because subscribers actually is a community. And the community is way more valuable than page views. Because page views is, I mean, it comes and goes. But a community stays. And a community you can build on for a long time. And I feel that even though we already built a very steady community, we're not halfway where we are right now. So I have this vision of building, you know, the European startup platform or news website, or whatever you like to call it, media business. But in order to do that, you know, we have to connect an ecosystem in, I don't know how many countries in different languages with one lingua franca, English. Even, you know, the time zones don't even differ that much. But, you know, I would say actually that, you know, 12% of our traffic is from the US, because there's a large thirst from the US as well, in knowing what is happening in Europe. We have a large audience in India. We have a large audience in Australia. So everybody wants to know what's going on in Europe, and, you know, sort of building out that community. I think that requires more in-depth content than just the news that we're publishing right now. I feel that we're on top of things, and now is the time to build that out to something larger, really.
Well, is your strategy to be very broad or be very narrow? And one of the questions I ask is this podcast is going against the advice of all the experts, because people say, be niche, be very focused, be very, tight on the questions that your audience wants answered. And I like, well, no, that's not me. I'm a generalist. I'm curious. I'm from everywhere. So it's literally everyday entrepreneurs everywhere. And I really want it to be that. So it's incredibly wide and broad and diverse and weird
Chris,
as possible.
Sorry if I interrupt, but you're actually following the advice, because that's also a niche. It's a niche on the everyday, everywhere entrepreneur. You know, there's people around the world being entrepreneurs, and you can learn from everybody somewhere, something. You know, and that's what makes it fun. And so, yeah, no, you actually stuck to the advice, but you're doing it in your own way. So, and sometimes it's good to break and bend the rules a little bit. I mean, I'm being stupid as a single founder launching a media business, and I'm actually competing with, you know, really large media companies in Europe with millions and millions in budget. It sounds like a stupid thing, but I'm still doing it because I believe in the dream, right? And doing it in our own way, and even if I see what our competitors are doing with millions and what we're doing on, again, a scruffy Dutch budget, because I'm very much a Dutch preppy, let's say, startup founder, we're not that far behind. And that's and I think that's the best compliment I can give myself. But it's also the best compliment you can give yourself, is you stuck to your own vision and dream, and you actually created a format without focusing too much on the format. And that's what makes it fun, and maybe it is also about making fun.
It is absolutely fun, and I think if you call it a niche be non-niche, I also believe that. And this is my own motivation that as I shared, I think before we started to press record, I don't know, but the goals of this for me are sort of 3 or 4 deep, and one of the goals is to connect and learn and discover. So if I wasn't first satisfying my need of connection, and we haven't spoken at least face to face in a couple of years, and so the genuine curiosity to discover and learn. That's what keeps me coming back, is because every conversation is interesting and unique and different. Yeah. I also love connecting and promoting. And so this is a way for me to promote you. So I will do it again. So if people go to siliconcanals.com, and you can download to the, exactly.
Where's the click the link? Where's the subscribe button?
Then do that, because there's really good information there. And so that's something that just gives me joy in connecting and promoting.
Thanks.
And also the fact that I believe that stories from scruffy Dutch startup founders like yourself, people are interested in that, because it is, sort of the every guy, giving it to the man, trying to do it differently on a shoestring budget and follow their passion and make an impact. Love it.
Yeah, it is ridiculously stupid though, but we're doing it anyway. And
that time will tell. The bravery and stupidity is a fine line, and you can only tell when you're done. So charge on.
I think I'm doing it. So my question to you is: do you actually have like a business model behind this podcast, or how do you see it for the long run? Are you looking to make money? Maybe have like a sponsor, or what is your idea for that?
I do have ideas. So I have a business model. Does it make money? The business model? No, not yet. So I guess there's a difference between a business model and a business reality, oftentimes. So the vision here is originally to have on Ebullient some courses and some other content that around the spirit of simplicity, that this podcast would eventually drive traffic to that platform where people could engage. We actually had even built a whole sort of membership site, and we had it all designed, and we threw it all away because we were building before we validated, which was a trend in my life, as you well know. So we scrapped all that, and the test that we're going to be running sometime soon, and I don't have it up here, is we are creating basically a simplicity toolkit, which we'll give away, that will be driving people and then capturing emails for newsletters and things. So that's similar to a little bit your model, but I don't want it to be a content platform like yours, but it's really an advisory place where people can learn some tactics for simplicity for their business.
May I interrupt you? You say it is not a content platform. So, and now I'm going to correct you and say you're wrong. It is a content platform, because you're going to create content. And so my biggest inspiration in the PR and marketing business where I come from, but also as a journalist, is David Meerman Scott. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but
Nope.
he's the author of The New Rules of Marketing PR and several other books, but he's most famous for The New Rules of Marketing PR. If you can ever get him on the podcast, that will be a very welcoming guest, I would say, a very inspiring person. I've met him a couple of times, so I always call him my personal guru, although the last times has been I don't know how many years ago. But what he always says is think like a publisher. That's his number one rule. And that's exactly what you're doing, Chris. You're thinking like a publisher. And what happens is when you start thinking like a publisher, you're immediately thinking about your audience. Because who's my audience? What does my audience want to learn? What can I bring to them? What can I give them that brings value? And that's even before, and that's exactly what you did right, is to throw away all the garbage of the things you created. You now have the ability to focus on your audience and to say, hey, this is what they want, and this is what they're going to create for them. So I don't know if you want to call it customer development or audience building or segmentation or personas or whatever, but you're going to build something that creates value. And that's probably the lesson you learned here the hard way, again, as we always tend to do as entrepreneurs. But definitely, you are a publisher.
I think like a publisher, and I will look up your personal guru, David Meerman Scott. I think the unintended positive consequences are multiple, meaning the luxury of my current work, meaning my consulting work, has exploded. And I think that's because, well, I don't know, maybe because people are doing a lot of transformation driven by COVID, but certainly I think, being out there once or twice with something on LinkedIn has kept me top of mind and making connections. So on one hand, ebullient has suffered because I've been having the luxury problem of different projects, around digital and transformation, agile, these other things that I'm busy with. Also, it's attracted some really interesting collaborators. So the simplicity scan has been ported to a sustainability scan because the framework was logical and they just poured the SDGs over it. And there's another brand, Cuba, which is actually now promoting based on I don't even want to call it IP, but based on the mental model of the simplicity in order to help organizations with sustainability. So that was pretty cool. And then if there was if I was really thinking like a publisher, and I would be very open to this, is if there was,
you already are.
if there was sponsorships that wanted to do a plug before or after, and particularly if it's a product or something. I'm thinking about Tim Ferriss. Tim Ferriss is my personal idol. He's out there sponsoring, bizarre things like mattresses and, whatever that he believes in. And I think that'd be really cool. So these are ways that we would, I guess, explore over time. But I've also given myself the ability to discover, because when I first started Ebullient, it was targeted at startups and small business. And what I realized is actually
a really tough market.
It's a really tough market because, as you noticed, many of them are just after the capital, the raising the financing, or it's a mom and pop shop and they're not really interested in scaling and they're doing fine. And then my superpower of pattern recognition is actually much more applicable at large enterprise. Right. And so over the last year, I've actually said, okay, well, let me reshape this a bit to be more of an enterprise solution. And that is just an evolution from actually talking to people and listening and actually validating through basically getting kicked in the balls because people, it wasn't resonating with the people who I thought, but then there was this other people saying, hey, I like this. And so I'm like, just be quiet. I'm talking to these people who don't want to talk to me. And then you start scratch your head and say, well, maybe I should go have the conversation over there with people who do want to talk to me. And that was my journey for the year.
Exactly. And, the content doesn't necessarily need to be directly geared towards your audience. It's about, building a name for yourself that always sounds a little bit, arrogant or self-centered. But that's what it's about. And especially as you know, in the beginning of my career, I was very much a freelancer. You know, building a name is all you got, because that's your brand, and what you're doing is you know, is very much, you know, you as a person, and you as a person being trustworthy because you're an expert in something. And being a publisher doesn't necessarily mean that you need to make money directly out of the content. The content can be many things. You know, for us as a real publisher, we make money by making content for others. That's our business model, because that's what we're really good at. But for you, it can also be, you know, consulting or speaking engagements, or you know, selling online workshops, or doing totally different things. And that's probably the lesson of think like a publisher. It can work for anybody, as long as, you know, you use that, you know, traffic or audience or community, whatever you're building, to, you know, to connect with these people and to sell them something. And it almost feels like a bad word in that connection, you know, selling something to your audience. But as long as it's something that they really want. And of course, because you are publishing, you already have this trust relationship with them. And that's invaluable. That's not something you can fake. That's not something you can put on a billboard and say, hey, let's trust us, you know, or an online ad. Yeah, I'm the one to trust. In the Netherlands, we have a saying for that. Or not a saying, it's actually a commercial. It's a commercial for toilet cleaner. And they're called wc Eend. So I don't know if you have that in the US as well, toilet duck. So it has this little brim. I think it's from Johnson & Johnson or something. And it's always, the ad was always, us from Toilet Duck, we recommend Toilet Duck. And that's how most of the business work. They're recommending them themselves. But if you're thinking like a publisher, other people will recommend you and, you know, share your content and make it go viral. And that's not something you can, yeah, I mean, that's the best PR you can imagine. And there's always one way or another to leverage and make money out of that. And maybe just even have just one customer out of it, if that's enough to support your living and lifestyle. Doesn't always necessarily need to be, you know, about these high growth scale ups and, you know, all that bullshit. If you can make a living for yourself, sometimes it's just it's enough. But, you know, being a publisher, yeah, to me, it always feels like a natural fit, but also something that is very rewarding in the end, because, yeah, you're offering so much value to others.
So, Remco, why don't you start your podcast? Meaning,
yeah,
what are you waiting for?
Well, because I'm actually a publisher, I was actually hoping to launch that with a sponsor. So for me, you know, my time is very, very valuable, and running a media business is not easy. And we have a small team. So if I want to do it, I want to do it properly. And, you know, if we have the resources and the sponsor straight away, and for us, that's actually possible because we already have, you know, outstanding contacts with people who might sponsor it or appreciate it. So, yeah, I mean, that's probably the only hurdle. And if that takes too long, I'm going to do it. And for me, it's always, you know, the momentum. If I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it now, and then I'm going to pursue it. And if I know that there might be some ifs and buts, I'm going to hold on to it, because there's only so many things that you can do at the same time. Yeah. And I know that a media business is a long-term thing. This is not like a scale-up where you have to do multiple things simultaneously. You know, last year I worked a lot on our SEO, on the quality of our writers. I had to hire a new editor-in-chief. You know, we have a job board, we have an event page. You know, all these things that are valuable to our audience. That takes time to build. And, you know, and it's like plants, you know, you plant a seed, but then you still have to water it and wait for it to grow. So there's no way, there's not like a magic potion that the beanstalk will grow to the heavens if you're in the media. So, yeah, I mean, it is on my wish list, and I will probably do it. And I have the right partners for it. So if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it properly and straight away. And then I'm going to, you know, really kick ass. And it's going to be really formatted, not like yours, you know, just winging it a little bit sometimes, perhaps. But yeah, it has to be, because we're a media business, it has to be really strictly formatted. Although I would really love to do your version of it as well, you know, just.
What do you mean by formatted? What is the, like?
So a format, for a publisher, a format is, you know, always the same length, a bumper in the beginning, a bumper at the end, you know, sort of the same questions. It can be very topical. You can, let's say, you call it scale up growth stories, for instance. I'm saying something out of the top of my head, but it's probably going to be somewhere along those lines. It needs to have perhaps a proper name. So also, you know, you have like an intake sheet, like the one you have yourself. You know, we know we're going to cut it to the same length, and yeah. So if I'm going to do it, it needs to be something like that, and probably we'll even use a studio if COVID allows it again. You know, so you can have proper guests. So if you're a radio host like I was in my junior years in college at the local radio station as a volunteer, I learned that the best conversations you can have when you're looking people eye to eye, and then you can also get like a real speed into the conversation, because you can actually, just, you know, you can cut people short, or you can go to somewhere else, or so
nice. Well, in a funny way, format means niche down, what it sounds like. Be more focused and be more so I guess my anti-niche is to be very wide and a bit unstructured. So no, cool stuff. Well, I people like it. You know, there's an audience out there. You've got the skill set for it. What I've done is try to, because it's not my primary revenue, I guess, driver, I have made it incredibly efficient. You know, so you know, when you checked in, you went to the guest page, and that forced you to give me all the data that I needed for your podcast page. And then, you know, because we do it and try to avoid editing, then we can just cut the head and tail off when we put our intro and outro on.
Exactly.
We kept it all very, very lean, yet also fun and playful and approachable. So it's cool. Remco Janssen from Silicon Canals, and you can find it at siliconcanals.com. They have a newsletter there, and you've heard it here first. There's a podcast coming soon to Silicon Canals.
Now I really feel that the pressure is on, Chris. Thank you for that.
Well, we can define what soon means. So, Remco, thank you so much. And you have tickled me that maybe for my podcast or yours, you will interview me back. So if your podcast doesn't happen soon, or whenever that means, then I think we should also have a playful moment where you come back on and interview me, maybe as a practice for your own podcast. I would love that. That's
well, I'm pretty interested in what happened to you. I mean, I can tell you lost weight, you lost your beard, you're in a totally different business environment than we last spoke and met. So I think there are a lot of questions that I can ask you, but let's hold them for now. Yeah. And thank you for having me again.
Thanks, Remco.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite player, and download the Simplicity Kit from ebullient.com.